The storm came without warning that June evening, rolling across the Nebraska plains like God's own fury. Clara McKinley stood at her kitchen window, watching the sky turn from amber to bruised purple. Her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. The wind had picked up something fierce, sending her chickens scurrying for cover and making the old cottonwood groan like a ship at sea. 6 months. 6 months since they'd lowered Samuel into the hard winter ground, his body broken by that cursed threshing machine. 6 months of waking to an empty bed, of setting one plate at the table, of learning to be half a person when she'd spent 8 years being whole. The first fat raindrop splattered against the glass, and Clara sighed. The barn door was banging again. She'd meant to fix that latch for weeks now. Samuel would have had it mended in an hour, whistling some tune he'd picked up at the general store. But Samuel was gone, and Clara was learning that a farm was too much for one pair of hands. No matter how willing, she was pulling on her oilskin when she saw him, a dark figure on the horizon, moving slow against the gathering storm. Her hand went instinctively to the shotgun by the door. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, visitors after dark rarely brought good news. The rider drew closer, and Clara could make out details through the sheets of rain. A big man, broad-shouldered, sitting his horse like he'd been born to it. But something was wrong. The animal was favoring its right foreleg, head hanging low. They stopped at her gate, man and beast both looking like they'd come through hell and hadn't quite made it to the other side. Clara stepped onto the porch, shotgun cradled in her arms. "That's close enough, mister." The man raised his head, water streaming from the brim of his hat, even in the dim light. She could see the exhaustion etched into his features, hollow cheeks, a week's worth of beard, eyes that had seen too many miles. "Ma'am," his voice was rough as gravel. "Name's Jesse Boone. My horse is lame, and this storm," he gestured at the sky, now split by lightning. "I'd be obliged for the use of your barn, just till morning." Clara's grip tightened on the gun. "How do I know you're not some outlaw? Some thief looking to take advantage of a woman alone?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "If I was fixing to rob you, ma'am, I'd have picked better weather for it." He shifted in the saddle, and his horse whinnied in pain. "I'll make you a trade. This horse for one night in your barn. She's a good mare, just needs rest and care. Come morning, you keep her, and I'll be on my way." "That horse isn't worth much lame." "She's worth more than freezing to death." The smile was gone now, replaced by something raw and honest. "I've got nothing else to offer except my word that I mean you no harm." Clara studied him through the driving rain. His clothes were worn but clean, his tack well maintained despite its age. A drifter, certainly, but not a careless one. And there was something in his eyes, not the calculating look of a predator, but the bone-deep weariness of a man who'd been running too long. Thunder crashed overhead, making up her mind for her. "Barn's around back. There's hay in the loft and a pump for water. You touch anything else, you'll meet the business end of this shotgun." "Yes, ma'am. Obliged." She watched him dismount stiffly, favoring his left side, and lead the limping mare toward the barn. Only when the door closed behind them did she lower the gun and return to the house. Clara tried to settle back into her evening routine, banking the fire, checking the windows, pretending that having a strange man in her barn was perfectly ordinary. But her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the yellow glow of the lantern visible through the cracks in the barn wall. What kind of man trades his horse for a dry place to sleep? Samuel had loved his horses more than most men loved their children. He would have slept in the rain before giving up his mount. But then, Samuel had never known what it was to drift, to own nothing but what you could carry. The storm raged on, and Clara found herself heating water for tea, then thinking better of it and warming some leftover stew. The man Jesse had looked half-starved beneath that rain slicker. It was Christian charity, nothing more. That's what she told herself as she ladled stew into a bowl and wrapped some cornbread in a cloth. She knocked on the barn door with the butt of the shotgun. "Mr. Boone." The door opened, and he stood there in his shirt sleeves, suspenders hanging loose, without the bulk of his coat. She could see how lean he was, all wire and sinew like a man who'd been pared down to essentials. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, thrusting the food at him. His eyes widened, slightly surprised. Maybe, at this small kindness. "Ma'am, I thank you." He took the bowl carefully, like it might disappear if he moved too fast. "You didn't need to." "Man's gotta eat." She turned to go, then hesitated. "Your mare, what's wrong with her?" "Stone bruise, I think. Maybe a strain. She just needs time. There's liniment in the tack room. Yellow bottle on the shelf?" "I'll replace it when I can." Clara almost laughed at that. When would a drifter ever pass this way again? "Just see that you're gone by sunup." Back in the house, she sat by the dying fire and tried to read her Bible, but the words swam before her eyes. She kept thinking about the careful way he'd taken that bowl, like a man unused to kindness, the way he'd offered his horse probably everything he owned in the world for one night's shelter. When had she become so hard before Samuel died? She would have invited any traveler in for a meal, storm or no storm. But widowhood had taught her caution, had built walls around her heart as surely as the fence around her property. The clock chimed midnight, and still she couldn't sleep. The storm was passing, leaving only the steady drum of rain on the roof. She found herself at the window again, watching that barn light flicker. Who was Jesse Boone? What was he running from? Men didn't drift without reason, didn't trade their horses unless they were desperate. And that look in his eyes, she'd seen it before. In the mirror these past 6 months. The look of someone who'd lost their anchor and was trying to remember how to float. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Tomorrow he'd be gone, just another stranger passing through. She'd tend his mare until she healed, then sell her at the market in town. Life would go on as it had, empty, manageable, safe. But tonight, for just these few hours, she wasn't alone on this farm. There was another heartbeat in her barn, another soul weathering the storm, and maybe that was worth more than a horse, after all. The barn light finally went out, and Clara made her way to bed. She lay there listening to the rain, thinking about freedom in cages, about the different ways a person could be lame, and somewhere between midnight and dawn, she finally fell asleep, dreaming of hoofbeats on an endless road and eyes that held too many miles. The rain had gentled to a whisper by the time Clara gave up on sleep. The clock on the mantel showed 2:30, and she lay there staring at the ceiling, every nerve aware of the stranger in her barn. It wasn't fear exactly she'd kept the shotgun within reach, but something else, a restlessness that made her skin feel too tight. She thought of Jesse Boone hunched in the hay, probably cold despite the June weather. Storms had a way of stealing warmth from the air, leaving everything damp and chilled. The image nagged at her until she threw back the covers with a muttered curse that would have scandalized her mother. The old trunk at the foot of her bed held Samuel's things. She'd meant to give them away, but somehow 6 months had passed and here they still were, smelling of tobacco and honest work. She pulled out 2 wool blankets and an old coat, trying not to think about the last time Samuel had worn it. The night air was fresh and cool, washed clean by the storm. Clara picked her way across the muddy yard, the blankets bundled in her arms. She could hear the horses moving restlessly in their stalls, her 2 plow horses and the stranger's lame mare. She knocked softly. "Mr. Boone." A rustling from inside, then his voice, alert despite the hour. "Ma'am?" "I brought blankets. Nights get cold after a storm." The door opened, and there he stood, hair mussed from the hay, shirt untucked, in the moonlight. She could see he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35 to her 29, though the road had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. "You didn't need to trouble yourself," he said, but his hands reached for the blankets eagerly enough. No trouble. She should have left then, but found herself lingering. "How's your mare?" "Resting. I rubbed her down good. Use that liniment like you said. He paused, studying her face in the silver light. You can't sleep either. It wasn't a question. Clara shrugged, wrapping her shawl tighter. Storm nights make me restless. Me too, though for me, it's most nights. He stepped aside. Would you, that is, if you'd like to check on the mare yourself. She shouldn't. Every rule of propriety said a widow shouldn't be in a barn with a strange man in the middle of the night. But propriety had died with Samuel, and she was tired of rules that kept her locked in her empty house. The barn was warm with animal heat and sweet with hay. Jessie's mare stood in the far stall, a pretty chestnut with a white blaze. Clara ran her hands down the animal's legs, feeling for heat or swelling. You know horses, Jessie observed. My father raised them, back in Ohio. Taught me everything. She straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt. This isn't just a stone bruise. She's got a strained tendon. Needs at least a week of rest. A week? His face was carefully neutral, but she heard the weight in those words. A man on the drift couldn't afford to stay anywhere a week. Where were you headed? West, maybe California, maybe Oregon. Somewhere the past can't follow. Clara found herself sitting on a hay bale, and somehow he was sitting beside her. Not too close, but close enough that she could smell the rain on his clothes. Running from the law. From myself, mostly. He picked up a piece of straw, twirling it between his fingers. You ever feel like you're living someone else's life, like you took a wrong turn somewhere and now you're stuck on a road that doesn't lead anywhere? The question hit her like a physical blow. Every day since my husband died. I'm sorry. Was it recent? 6 months. Threshing accident. She surprised herself by continuing. We were married 8 years. No children, that was hard on him. He wanted sons to work the farm, carry on his name. I wanted them too, but... She shrugged. God had other plans. Maybe it's a mercy. This world's hard enough without bringing young ones into it. That's a dark thought. I've seen dark things. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you miss him? Clara considered the question. I miss having someone to talk to at supper. I miss the way he'd whistle while he worked. I missed knowing what each day would bring. She turned to look at him. But if I'm honest, truly honest, I don't know if I miss him or just the life we had. Is that terrible? No, it's human. He met her eyes, and she saw understanding there. I was married once. Sarah, sweet girl, 17 when we wed. I was 20. Thought I knew everything. Had a little farm in Missouri. 40 acres of good land. What happened? Cholera took her. Summer of 71. The baby, too, didn't even live long enough to have a name. His voice was steady, but his hands clenched around the straw. I tried to keep the farm going, but everywhere I looked, I saw her, sold it to the first buyer and started moving. Been moving ever since. 15 years, Clara whispered. Don't you ever want to stop? Every damn day. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Problem is, once you start running, it becomes all you know. You forget how to stand still. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the horses breathe and the last of the rain pattering on the roof. Clara felt something ease in her chest. A knot she hadn't known was there. When was the last time she'd talked to someone? Really talked. Not just exchanged pleasantries about weather and crops. What's freedom to a woman tied to a farm? Jessie asked suddenly. That's what I was thinking when I saw your place. Here's this whole spread, all this land, but you're as much a prisoner as any convict. It's not a prison if you choose it. Do you choose it? Clara stood abruptly, unsettled by the question. I should get back. I didn't mean to offend. You didn't. She softened her voice. It's just, I haven't thought about choices in a long time. Haven't had the luxury. Jessie rose too, moving with the careful grace of a man who'd learned not to make sudden movements. Thank you for the blankets, and the company. At the barn door, Clara turned back. That question you asked about freedom, I don't have an answer. But maybe, she hesitated, then plunged ahead. Maybe you could ask me again at breakfast. If you're willing to work for it, there's fence needs mending in the north pasture. His smile was different this time. Younger, almost boyish. I'm a fair hand with fence work. Sunrise, then I'll have coffee on. Clara walked back to the house, her mind churning. What was she doing, inviting him to stay? But the thought of another silent breakfast, another day of talking to chickens and horses, was suddenly unbearable. Inside, she moved to her bedroom window, which faced the barn. The moonlight had faded, leaving only the faint gray that promised dawn, somewhere out there. Jessie Boone was settling into those blankets, probably wondering what kind of woman invited drifters to breakfast. A lonely one. Clara thought, a woman who'd forgotten what her own voice sounded like until a stranger asked her real questions and listened to the answers. She climbed back into bed, and this time, sleep came easily. Her last thought was of Jessie's question. What's freedom to a woman tied to a farm? She still didn't have an answer. But for the first time in 6 months, she was curious to find out. The rooster crowed at first light, and Clara woke with an unfamiliar feeling in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it, anticipation. She had something to look forward to besides another day of chores and silence. As she dressed and started the coffee, she caught herself humming one of Samuel's tunes. She realized with a start, but instead of the usual stab of grief, she felt only a gentle sadness. Maybe that was progress. Maybe that was what moving on looked like, not forgetting, but remembering without drowning. Through the kitchen window, she saw Jesse emerge from the barn, stretching in the early light. He'd kept his word, ready to work for his breakfast, and maybe, just maybe, ready to ask that question again, the one that had kept her awake, the one that made her wonder if she'd been sleepwalking through life these past 6 months. What was freedom to a woman tied to a farm? Clara poured 2 cups of coffee and prepared to find out. The smell of frying bacon filled Clara's kitchen as Jessie knocked on the back door. Hat in hand, she'd forgotten what it was like to cook for 2, and had perhaps gotten carried away. Eggs, bacon, flapjacks, and fresh biscuits crowded the table. Smells like Sunday morning at my grandmother's house, Jessie said, a note of wonder in his voice. Wash up at the pump. Food's getting cold. She watched through the window as he rolled up his sleeves and scrubbed his hands and face, water darkening his collar. There was something intimate about the simple act, seeing a man make himself presentable at her pump, using her soap. Samuel used to do the same thing every morning, but this felt different, charged with the electricity of the unfamiliar. When he came in, Clara was struck again by how he filled the space without overwhelming it. Samuel had been a small, wiry man who moved in quick bursts. Jesse moved deliberately, each gesture considered, like a man who'd learned to be careful in the world. This is too much, he said, surveying the spread. I forgot how to cook for one person. She poured coffee, strong and black. Might as well eat it before it goes to waste. They ate in companionable silence at first, Jesse attacking the food with the focused intensity of a man who'd missed too many meals. Clara found herself sneaking glances the way his hair curled at his neck, still damp from washing, the careful way he handled her good china, as if afraid his rough hands might break something fine. I haven't sat at a proper table in months, he finally said, sitting back with a contented sigh. Been making do with cold biscuits and jerky, maybe a pot of beans when I could manage a fire. Where do you sleep? Under the stars, mostly. Sometimes a kind soul offers their barn, like you did. Once in a while I work for a bed-mucking stalls, splitting wood, whatever needs doing. Clara refilled his cup. That's no way to live. It's living, he shrugged. More than some folks get. She wanted to argue, but found she couldn't. He was right, he was alive, free to go where he pleased, beholden to no one. Meanwhile, she woke every day to the same walls, the same chores, the same endless cycle of seasons. About that fence, she said, changing the subject. North pasture's in bad shape. Storm last month knocked down a whole section, and I haven't... She trailed off, unwilling to admit she'd been too overwhelmed to face it. I'll take a look after breakfast. Jessie pushed back from the table, started gathering plates. You don't have to... Man works, man eats, man cleans. He carried the dishes to the wash basin like he'd been doing it all his life. My grandmother's rules. She'd tan my hide if she knew I'd let a lady clean up after me. Clara found herself smiling. She sounds formidable. Raised 6 boys after my grandfather died. Had to be formidable. He rolled up his sleeves again, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. Tell me about the farm. How many acres? 160. Samuel proved it up under the Homestead Act back in '76. Clara picked up a dish towel, falling into the familiar rhythm of drying as he washed. We run cattle mostly, some crops. Or we did. I sold most of the herd last month, couldn't manage them alone. Must be hard, trying to work this place by yourself. I manage. The words came out sharper than intended. Jessie glanced at her, hands still in the soapy water. I'm sure you do. Didn't mean to suggest otherwise. They finished the dishes in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable when the last plate was put away. Jessie turned to her, drying his hands on his pants. Thank you for breakfast, and for trusting me enough to share your table. Been a long time since anyone's done that. There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that made Clara's chest tight. Everyone deserves a decent meal. Not everyone offers one. They stood there in her kitchen, morning light streaming through the windows, and Clara felt that charge again, something sparking in the space between them. Jessie seemed to feel it too. He took a half step back, reaching for his hat. I'll get started on that fence. Tools are in the barn. Take whatever you need. She watched him cross the yard, noting the slight hitch in his stride she hadn't seen before. Another mystery, an old injury, perhaps, or just the toll of sleeping on hard ground. When he disappeared into the barn, she turned away, unsettled by how empty the kitchen felt without him. Clara threw herself into her morning chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, milking the 2 cows she'd kept. But her mind kept wandering to the north pasture where she could see Jessie's figure in the distance, post-hole digger in hand. By noon, the sun was brutal. She filled a water jug and packed a simple lunch: cold chicken, bread, early strawberries from her garden. The walk to the north pasture was longer than she remembered. Or maybe she'd just gotten used to limiting her world to the barnyard and kitchen garden. Jessie had his shirt off, back glistening with sweat as he wrestled a post into place. Clara stopped short, her breath catching. A network of scars crisscrossed his back, some old and faded, others newer, still pink. One ran from his left shoulder blade nearly to his waist. A vicious mark that spoke of violence survived. He must have heard her because he turned, reaching quickly for his shirt. Mrs. McKinley. I didn't... Clara. The name slipped out without thought. Just Clara. He paused, shirt in hand, something flickering across his face. Clara. She held out the water jug. Thought you might be thirsty. Obliged. He pulled the shirt on, but not before she saw more scars across his chest. He drank deeply, water running down his chin, and Clara found herself mesmerized by the movement of his throat. You've done more in one morning than I managed in a month, she said, surveying the repaired fence line. It's good work, honest work. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Been a while since I could say that. Clara spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood and unpacked the lunch. Jessie joined her after a moment's hesitation, careful to leave proper distance between them. Those scars, she said quietly. The war. Some. He bit into the chicken, chewing slowly. Some from after. After... He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I've made poor choices, trusted the wrong people. Sometimes a man pays for that in blood. Is that what you're running from? Among other things. He looked at her directly. Does it frighten you, knowing I've got that kind of past? Clara considered this. Should she be frightened? Here was a man marked by violence, with secrets he wouldn't name, alone with her miles from anywhere. But fear wasn't what she felt. We've all got scars, she said finally. Some just show more than others. Jessie's smile was sad. Speaking from experience. Samuel was a good man, but he had his moments, especially when the wheat prices fell or the cattle got sick, especially when another month passed and I didn't. She touched her flat stomach unconsciously. A man's disappointments can make him hard sometimes. He hit you. The question was soft, but something dangerous flickered in Jessie's eyes. Once or twice. Nothing I couldn't handle. Clara picked at the blanket's fringe. He always apologized after, said it was the pressure, the worry. And I understood. This land can break a person if they let it. Understanding isn't the same as accepting. No, she agreed. It's not. They finished lunch in thoughtful silence. Then Jessie returned to work, despite her suggestion he rest through the heat of the day. Clara stayed under the tree, watching him move along the fence line with steady purpose. There was something healing in it. She realized, seeing broken things made whole, watching someone care for her land like it mattered. As the afternoon wore on, she found herself talking, words spilling out like water from a broken dam. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about meeting Samuel at a church social, about their early dreams for the farm. Jessie worked and listened, occasionally asking a question or sharing his own memory fishing with his brothers in Missouri streams, his grandmother's rose garden, the girl named Sarah who'd loved thunderstorms. She would have liked you, he said as the sun slanted low. Sarah, she had strong opinions about things, didn't hold with women pretending to be helpless. I don't feel strong, Clara admitted. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. Jessie set down his tools and walked over, sweat-stained and dusty. You fed a stranger in a storm. You're running a farm alone. You buried a husband and got up the next day. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his brown eyes. That's not strength. That's just surviving. Sometimes they're the same thing. As they walked back to the house in the gathering dusk, tools over Jessie's shoulder, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. The weight was still there. Grief, loneliness, the endless burden of the farm, but it felt lighter somehow, shared across two sets of shoulders instead of one. At the barn, Jessie paused. I should move on tomorrow. Your mare, my mare, she seems better. No need to impose further. That fence isn't finished. Clara heard herself say, and there's the chicken coop needs fixing, and hay to cut next week. She stopped, embarrassed by her transparency. You wanting to hire me on. His voice was carefully neutral. I'm wanting. What was she wanting? Company help something more dangerous than either. I'm offering room and board for honest work. Nothing more. Nothing more, he repeated, and she couldn't tell if that was disappointment or relief in his voice. All right then, but I'll keep sleeping in the barn. Wouldn't be proper otherwise. No, Clara agreed. It wouldn't. But as she prepared supper for two again, humming without realizing it, she wondered what propriety had to do with anything anymore. She was a widow on a failing farm. He was a drifter with scarred skin and haunted eyes, and the world would keep spinning regardless of where anyone slept. Through the window, she watched Jessie tend to the horses, talking to them in a low voice she couldn't quite hear. Her question from breakfast echoed back what was freedom to a woman tied to a farm. Maybe, she thought, freedom wasn't about leaving. Maybe it was about choosing to stay, but on your own terms, with your own reasons. And maybe those reasons could include a man who washed dishes without being asked and fixed fences like he was mending the world itself. The door to possibility, like her kitchen door, stood slightly ajar. All she had to do was decide whether to close it or open it wider. The first time Jesse returned, Clara told herself it was coincidence. A week had passed since he'd ridden off on the newly healed mare, touching his hat brim in farewell. She'd stood in the yard watching until he was just a speck on the horizon, then gone about her day as if strange men with scarred backs appeared and disappeared from her life all the time. But there he was on a Tuesday afternoon, leading his mare up the drive, a dressed rabbit hanging from his saddle. "Thought you might like some fresh meat," he said by way of greeting. "Caught more than I could eat." She took the rabbit, trying to ignore how her pulse quickened. "You just happened to be passing by." Something like that. His smile was sheepish. "Truth is, I made it about 20 miles before I remembered I'd left a fence post loose. Wouldn't sit right, leaving a job unfinished." Clara knew every fence post on her property, and none were loose. But she heard herself saying, "Well, you'd better fix it then. Can't have the cattle getting out." He stayed 2 days, fixing the imaginary fence post and a dozen other things that actually did need attention. They fell into an easy rhythm, Jesse working while Clara went about her chores, meeting for meals where conversation flowed like water over stones. He slept in the barn, she in the house, and if she lay awake thinking about him in the hay not 50 yards away, that was her business alone. When he left again, Clara found a silver dollar on the kitchen table payment for the meals. She supposed. She nearly threw it in the stove out of pride, then thought better of it. Times were hard, and pride didn't buy flour or coffee. The second return came 10 days later, during a thunderstorm that reminded her of their first meeting. This time his excuse was a broken bridle that needed mending. And did she happen to have any spare leather? "You could have fixed this in any town," Clara said, examining the bridle that looked suspiciously like it had been cut with a knife. "Towns have too many people asking questions." Jessie stood dripping in her kitchen, and she tried not to remember how he'd looked that first night, tired and wary, and somehow exactly what she'd been waiting for without knowing it. He stayed 3 days that time, until the weather cleared. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and Clara found herself storing up things to tell him during his absences, how the barn cat had kittens, how she'd finally sold the extra plow, how the sunset looked like fire across the wheat fields he'd helped her tend. The third time, he didn't bother with excuses. "Missed your cooking," was all he said, standing at her gate with a string of fish and a face full of sunburn. "That all you missed?" The words slipped out before Clara could stop them. Jessie's eyes darkened. "No, not all." They stood there, the July heat shimmering between them, until Clara's courage failed and she took the fish without another word. That became the pattern of their summer, Jessie drifting away for a week or two, then returning with some small offering and smaller excuse. Each time he stayed a little longer, fixed a little more, carved out a little more space in Clara's carefully ordered life. The fourth time, he brought her a book worn and water-stained but readable. "Found it in an abandoned sod house," he said. "Thought you might like something new to read of an evening." It was a volume of Tennyson's poems, pages marked with pressed flowers from some previous owner. Clara ran her fingers over the brittle petals, thinking of another woman in another lonely house, pressing beauty between pages to keep it from fading. "Thank you," she said, and meant more than just the book. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, when Jessie told her about his brother. Tom was 2 years younger, full of fire and foolishness. Got mixed up with some men running cattle across the Mexican border, not rustling exactly, but not honest either. He paused, rolling a cigarette with practiced fingers. When the Rangers came, Tom tried to run, took a bullet in the back. "Jessie." "I wasn't there. Was working an honest job for once, breaking horses up in Kansas. By the time I got word, he was 3 weeks in the ground." The match flared, illuminating his face briefly. The man who shot him, Ranger named Patterson, bragged about it in every saloon from El Paso to Fort Worth. said Tom squealed like a pig when the bullet hit. Clara felt a chill despite the warm evening. What did you do? What would you have done? He looked at her sideways. If someone killed what you loved and laughed about it after, she thought of Samuel, broken and bleeding in the field. If someone had caused that, had boasted about it, I don't know, something terrible, probably. Yeah, Jesse drew on his cigarette. Something terrible. They sat in silence while the stars emerged one by one. Finally, Clara asked, Is Patterson still hunting you? Patterson's not hunting anyone anymore. His voice was flat. But the law is, rangers don't take kindly to people evening the score with one of their own. Clara knew she should be horrified. This man had killed not in war or self-defense, but in cold revenge. Yet all she felt was a deep sadness for the waste of it all. Tom dead, Patterson dead, Jesse forever marked by violence. How long ago? 3 years. Been moving ever since. He stubbed out the cigarette carefully. You want me to leave now, I'd understand. Would you leave if I asked? Yes, no hesitation. But I'd hate it. Why? He turned to face her fully, and in the dim light she could see the rawness in his expression. Because for the first time in 3 years, I want to stop moving, because I wake up thinking about fence posts and chicken coops instead of who might be following me. Because you look at me like I'm just a man, not a killer or a drifter or a problem to be solved. Clara's heart was racing. Jesse! And because when I'm not here, all I think about is coming back. He stood abruptly. I shouldn't have said that. I'll go. She caught his sleeve. Don't! They stood frozen, her hand on his arm, his eyes searching her face. Then Clara did something that would have shocked her proper Ohio mother. She stepped closer, close enough to smell leather and tobacco and the indefinable scent that was simply Jesse. I think about you too, she whispered. When you're gone, wonder where you are, if you're safe, if you'll come back. Clara! Her name was a prayer on his lips. You don't know what you're saying. I'm saying stay, not just tonight. Stay until you can't anymore. His hand came up to cup her cheek, work-roughened thumb tracing her cheekbone. And if that's forever, then stay forever. He kissed her then, gentle as rain, and Clara felt something crack open inside her chest, not breaking but blooming, like flowers pressed too long between pages, finally remembering sunlight. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jesse rested his forehead against hers. I've got nothing to offer you. No land, no money, no name that isn't wanted somewhere. I've got land. Money doesn't last. And names... Clara pulled back to look at him. Names can be changed. It's not that simple. Nothing is, but maybe it doesn't have to be complicated either. She stepped away, wrapping her arms around herself. I'm not asking for promises. Jesse, I'm just asking you to stop leaving. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, all right, I'll stay. God help us both. But I'll stay. That night, Jesse slept in the house for the first time, not in her bed, but on a pallet by the stove, his guns within reach. Clara lay wakeful, aware of every sound he made, every shift and sigh. It wasn't proper, wasn't wise, might not even be safe, but for the first time in months, the house didn't feel empty. When morning came, Jesse was already up, coffee made and bacon frying. He looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure of his welcome in daylight. Clara solved that by walking straight to him and kissing him good morning, tasting coffee and possibility on his lips. No more leaving, she said against his mouth. No more leaving, he agreed, and sealed it with another kiss. They both knew it couldn't last. Men like Jesse didn't just disappear someone. Somewhere was looking. The past had a way of catching up, no matter how far or fast you ran. But for now, for this golden moment between summer and whatever came after, they had this a scarred man and a lonely woman, building something fragile and necessary in the heart of the Nebraska plains. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The grape arbor behind Clara's house had been Samuel's pride, a small indulgence in a life that allowed few now. In the heavy heat of late August, the vines hung thick with purple fruit, and Clara found herself there most afternoons, picking grapes for preserves she wasn't sure she'd ever make. Jessie found her there on a particularly sultry Tuesday, her fingers stained purple, sweat beading at her temples. He'd been cutting hay in the south field, and his shirt clung to him like a second skin. "Thought you might be thirsty," Clara said, offering him the water jug she'd brought for herself. He drank deeply, and she watched the movement of his throat, the way water escaped to run down his neck. These past weeks had worn away the careful distance between them, replaced it with something tender and terrifying. They moved around each other like dancers now, aware of every gesture, every glance. "Hot work," he said, handing back the jug. "Everything's hot work in August." Clara reached for another cluster of grapes, but the best ones hung high, just out of reach. She stretched, toes pointed, fingers grasping at air. "Here!" Jessie moved behind her, his chest against her back as he reached over her head. "Got it." But instead of moving away once he'd plucked the grapes, he stayed there, pressed against her in the dappled shade. Clara could feel his heart beating, quick and hard. "Jessie!" His name came out breathless. "Tell me to move." His voice was rough in her ear. "Tell me to go back to the hayfield." She turned in his arms instead, her back against the arbor post, his hands braced on either side of her. "I'm tired of telling you to go anywhere." His eyes searched hers. "Clara, She silenced him by reaching up, fingers finding the top button of his shirt. No words, not right now. The button came free, then another. Jessie stood perfectly still, barely breathing, as she undid them all and pushed the damp fabric off his shoulders. In the filtered sunlight, she could see every scar, every mark his hard life had left behind. "So many stories," she murmured, tracing a thin white line across his ribs. "Not all of them worth telling." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "Clara, are you sure?" Instead of answering, she turned her back to him. "The buttons. I can never reach them all myself." His fingers trembled as they worked the long row of buttons down her spine. When the dress loosened, Clara let it fall forward just enough to bare her shoulders, the nape of her neck where damp tendrils of hair clung. Jessie made a sound low in his throat, pain or want or both. His lips found the curve where neck met shoulder, and Clara gasped, her knees suddenly weak. "Not here," he said against her skin. "Not like this. You deserve better than a quick fumble in the grape arbor." "I deserve—" Clara turned to face him again, holding her loosened dress with one hand. "I deserve to choose, and I choose you. Here, now." But even as she said it, Jessie was already rebuttoning her dress with gentle fingers, smoothing her hair back from her face. When we, he stopped, started again. "It's going to mean something, not just scratching an itch or giving in to the heat. When I love you, Clara McKinley, it's going to be with everything I have left to give." The word love hung between them like fruit on the vine ripe, ready, waiting to be claimed. "You think you don't already?" Clara asked softly. Jessie's laugh was pained. "Oh, I love you. Loved you since that first morning when you trusted me enough to turn your back while you cooked breakfast. Love you more every day I stay, every meal we share, every fence post I set in your ground." He cupped her face in his hands. "But there's things you don't know, things that might change how you feel. About Patterson, not just him." Jessie stepped back, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. "After Tom died, after I settled things with Patterson, I fell in with some men, did things I'm not proud of. Train robbery up in Wyoming, bank in Kansas that went bad guard got shot, though not by me. I told myself it was survival, but truth is, I wanted to hurt the world as much as it had hurt me. Clara sank onto the wooden bench Samuel had built beneath the arbor. How long were you with them? 6 months. Long enough to earn a reputation. Short enough that my face isn't on every wanted poster from here to California. He sat beside her, careful not to touch. I left when they started talking about hitting a mail train. Federal crime. I may be many things, but I'm not stupid enough to bring that kind of heat down. And they let you leave just like that? Jesse's smile was grim. Well, I might have taken my share of the last job with me. Call it severance pay. They weren't happy, but they also knew better than to come after me. He looked at her sideways. So, now you know. I'm not just a killer. I'm a thief too. Still want me to stay. Clara considered this. The man beside her had robbed trains and banks, had killed at least one person in cold blood. He was exactly what her mother had warned her about, what every decent person feared, and yet, did you ever hurt anyone who didn't deserve it? Anyone innocent? Never, though I suppose everyone thinks they're innocent in their own story. Samuel hit me, Clara said suddenly. I told you once or twice, but it was more than that. When the crops failed or the baby didn't come or he'd been drinking, nothing that left permanent marks, nothing the neighbors would notice, but enough that I learned to read his moods like weather, learned when to be elsewhere. Jesse's hands clenched into fists. That's different. Is it? He never robbed a train, never shot a ranger, but he broke something in me all the same, made me small and careful and afraid. She turned to look at him directly. You've done terrible things, Jesse Boone, but you've never made me feel small. Clara, I know who you are, know what you've done, and I'm asking you to stay anyway. She reached for his hand, laced their fingers together. But if we do this, if we try to build something here, I need all of it. All of you. No more sleeping in separate rooms. No more careful distance. I've had enough of half a life. Jesse brought their joined hands to his lips. You know what you're risking if someone comes looking. Then we'll face it together, or run together, or whatever we need to do. Clara squeezed his fingers. I'm not some naive girl, Jesse. I'm a woman who's buried a husband and kept a farm running and knows exactly how much I'm willing to gamble for a chance at something real. Thunder rumbled in the distance, another afternoon storm building over the plains. Jesse stood, pulling Clara up with him. Storm's coming. We should get inside. But instead of heading for the house, he pulled her close, one hand tangling in her hair. If we do this, it's for keeps. No half measures, no back doors. I'll be your man, and you'll be my woman. And devil take anyone who objects. Yes, Clara breathed against his mouth. Yes, to all of it. He kissed her then, deep and desperate. Nothing like the gentle touches they'd shared before. Clara felt that same cracking sensation in her chest, but wider now, like a dam giving way. When the first fat raindrops began to fall, they were still wrapped around each other, purple grape stains on their fingers and promises on their lips. They ran for the house through the sudden downpour, hand in hand and laughing like children. In the kitchen, dripping and breathless, they stood looking at each other across the familiar space. Your room or mine? Jesse asked. And there was something beautiful in the simplicity of it. No more hesitation, no more careful propriety. Ours, Clara said firmly, and led him down the hall to the bedroom she'd shared with Samuel, ready to fill it with new memories, better ones. Outside, the storm raged against the windows, but inside was warmth and choice and two people building something new from the ashes of their pasts. It wasn't safe or simple or guaranteed to last, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The grapes in the arbor would go unpicked that day, left to the birds and the rain. Clara had found something sweeter, something worth preserving not in jars on a shelf, but in the space between two hearts that had traveled long, hard roads to find each other. And when the storm passed and the sun emerged, they were still there, wrapped in each other and in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Some stories could have happy endings after all. The first night Jessie stayed in the house truly stayed. Not just as a wounded bird seeking shelter, Clara lay awake listening to him breathe beside her. The bed felt different with his weight in it. The whole room transformed by his presence. His boots stood next to Samuel's old wardrobe. His gun belt hung on the bedpost. And Clara thought how strange it was that such small changes could remake a world. They'd been careful with each other, mindful of the enormity of what they were choosing. Jessie had held her like she was made of spun glass, and she'd traced his scars in the lamplight, learning the map of him when they finally came together. It was with a tenderness that left them both shaking, not just from desire, but from the weight of trust freely given. Now, with the moon painting silver squares on the floor, Clara studied his sleeping face. The harsh lines had softened, making him look younger, almost boyish. She reached out to touch a strand of hair that had fallen across his forehead, then stopped. Even in sleep, Jessie came alert at sudden movements, a habit born of too many nights spent running.
"It's all right,"
she whispered when his eyes flew open.
"Just me."
He relaxed incrementally, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips, still getting used to waking up somewhere safe. "Are we safe?" "Tonight we are." He pulled her closer, tucking her head beneath his chin. "That's enough for now." They lay quiet, listening to the night sounds, crickets, the distant bark of a coyote, wind in the cottonwoods. Finally, Jessie spoke, his voice rumbling through his chest. "I need to tell you something about the money." Clara stiffened slightly. "What money?" "My share from the last job, before I left the gang." He stroked her hair, a soothing gesture. "It's hidden about 20 miles north of here, in an old mine shaft, almost $3,000.
"Jessie."
"Stolen money, I know, but it could make a difference. Could buy seed for next season, fix up the barn, maybe even hire some hands come harvest time." Clara pulled back to look at him.
"Blood money."
"Yes." He didn't try to soften it. "Question is, does it do more good sitting in a hole in the ground or putting this farm back on its feet?" She thought about this, about the ledger in the kitchen drawer with its columns of red, about the tax bill coming due in October. "I don't know if I can." "You don't have to decide tonight, or ever. I just wanted you to know it exists." He touched her face gently. "I've been thinking, though, about what you said earlier, about facing things together." "What about it?" "Maybe it's time I stopped running, faced up to what I've done, served my time if I have to." Clara sat up abruptly.
"No. Hear me out."
"No." She gripped his shoulders, fingers digging in. "You think I waited all this time to find you just to lose you to some prison or worse? Clara, I can't give you a real life while I'm looking over my shoulder. Can't give you children who'll grow up wondering why their father jumps at shadows." "Children." The word hung between them like a question. "Don't you want them?" "I did, with Samuel at first, but month after month of disappointment, and then his anger about it." She shook her head. "I stopped hoping, but now." Clara lay back down, curling into his side. "Ask me again in daylight. Everything seems possible in the dark." They dozed fitfully, waking to touch each other, to murmur half-formed thoughts, to reassure themselves this was real. When dawn finally came, pale pink at the windows, they were both exhausted and exhilarated. "I'll make breakfast," Clara said, reaching for her wrapper. "Wait." Jessie caught her hand. "Before we go out there, before we start the day, tell me true. Do you regret this?" She looked at him, rumpled and vulnerable in the morning light. "The only thing I regret is that you didn't find my farm sooner." His smile was like sunrise. "Then I'll make breakfast. You stay right here." Clara laughed. "You don't even know where I keep the coffee." "I'll find it. Found you, didn't I? Everything else is easy after that." She watched him pull on his pants and pad barefoot toward the kitchen, unself-conscious as a cat. Through the doorway, she could hear him moving around, the clatter of pans, the scratch of a match. Such ordinary sounds, but they filled the house with life in a way it hadn't known in months. When he returned with a tray coffee, biscuits and eggs fried the way she liked them, Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "What's wrong?" Jessie set the tray aside, gathering her close.
Did I? No, it's just...
She wiped her eyes, laughing at herself.
Samuel never brought me breakfast in bed. Said it would make me soft, expect too much.
"You should expect everything," Jessie said fiercely. "Every good thing this world has to offer, and I aim to give you as much of it as I can." They ate in bed, getting crumbs on the sheets and not caring. Jessie told her about a ranch he'd worked once in Texas, where the cook made biscuits so light they nearly floated away. Clara shared memories of her mother's Sunday dinners, table groaning under the weight of plenty.
"We could have that," Jessie said suddenly. "A real home, Sunday dinners and harvest dances and children underfoot."
"With what money the stolen bills in that mine shaft?" He set his coffee aside carefully. "I've been thinking about that too. What if I turned myself in, but with a lawyer made a deal I never killed anyone but Patterson, and he had it coming. Never shot that bank guard. If I testified against the others, maybe
they'd hang you anyway."
Clara's voice was sharp.
"Or maybe you'd get 20 years hard labor. Either way,
I'd be alone again. You'd be free to find someone better, someone who could give you a clean life."
"I don't want someone better. I want you."
She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes.
"Listen to me, Jessie Boone. I'm not some China doll who needs protecting from hard choices.
We'll use that money if we need to. We'll run if we have to, but we do it together. Or not at all." He turned his head to kiss her palm.
"You're fierce when you're riled."
"I'm fierce all the time. You just bring it out more." They spent the morning in bed, talking and planning and discovering each other all over again. By the time they finally emerged, the sun was high and the day's work waiting. But something fundamental had shifted. They moved through the chores as partners now, each anticipating the other's needs. That evening, sitting on the porch as had become their habit, Jessie pulled out a piece of paper he'd been worrying at all day.
"What's that?"
Clara asked. "Letter to a lawyer I knew in Kansas City. Good man, honest as they come in that profession." He showed her the careful script. "I'm asking what my options might be, hypothetically."
"Jessie..."
"I'm not deciding anything, just gathering information." He folded the letter, slipping it into his shirt pocket. "I want to give you better than a life spent looking over our shoulders. And I want you alive and here with me. That's better than any clean slate." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies begin their evening dance. Finally, Clara spoke.
"That money, how hard would it be to get..."
Jessie looked at her sharply. "Not hard, but Clara,
3,000 could change everything.
Pay off the mortgage, buy cattle, have enough left for bad years." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no either. You'd take stolen money. I'd take the future it could buy us."
"There's a difference."
Jessie pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You know what? You might be fiercer than me. Good thing one of us is..." That night, they made love with a desperate edge, as if trying to forge something too strong to break. Afterward, Jessie held her tight and whispered promises in the dark that he'd stay, that he'd find a way to make things right, that he'd love her until his last breath. Clara believed him, but she also knew that life had a way of breaking promises, no matter how sincerely made. So she held him just as tight and made her own silent vows to fight for this, to choose hope over fear, to build something worth having even if it couldn't last forever. Because nothing lasted forever. Samuel had taught her that, but maybe, with Jessie's arms around her and their hearts beating in time, Forever wasn't the point. Maybe now was enough. The trouble started with Ezra Stewart's wagon breaking an axle near their property line. Jesse had been out checking the fence when he heard the crack of splintering wood and Stewart's elaborate cursing. Without thinking, he'd gone to help. "Mighty kind of you, stranger," Stewart said, eyeing Jesse with the calculating look of a man who collected information like some men collected coins. "Don't believe we've been properly introduced. Ezra Stewart. I farm the next section over." "Jesse." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "McKinley. Clara's my wife." The lie came smooth as butter, but Stewart's eyes sharpened. "McKinley. You say funny. I was at Sam McKinley's funeral. Don't recall any mention of brothers." "Cousin," Jesse amended, bending to examine the broken axle. "Distant. Came to help Clara with the farm after we heard about Sam." They worked in relative silence. Jesse aware of Stewart's scrutiny. He'd gotten soft, living these weeks in Clara's sunshine. The old Jesse would never have offered help, never have given a name, never have let anyone close enough to ask questions. "You know," Stewart said conversationally as they levered the wagon up, "there's been talk of a drifter spending time at the widow McKinley's place. Course, I told folks that couldn't be right. Clara's too proper a woman for that kind of scandal." Jesse's hands tightened on the lever. "Good thing she's got family to help her then." "Family, right." Stewart's smile was thin as paper. "Well, family or not, you might want to know there's been a man asking around town, rough-looking fellow with a badge. Says he's looking for someone matches your general description." The lever slipped, and Jesse barely avoided crushing his fingers. Lots of men fit a general description. True enough. This one, though, he seemed mighty interested when someone mentioned seeing a stranger out this way. Stewart tested the temporary repair they'd made. "Just thought you should know. Family looks out for family, after all." Jesse helped him get the wagon rolling again, but his mind was racing. A man with a badge asking questions. Could be nothing bounty hunters and lawmen passed through all the time. Could be everything the past finally catching up. When he got back to the house, Clara was hanging wash, humming one of those church hymns she favored. The sight of her, skirts billowing in the breeze, hair coming loose from its pins, made his chest tight with fear. He'd brought danger to her door, just as he'd always known he would. "You're back early," she said, smiling. Then she saw his face. "What's wrong?" He told her about Stewart, about the questions, about the man with the badge. Clara listened, hands stilling on the wet shirt she'd been pinning up. "Stewart's always been a gossip," she said finally. "Probably making more of it than there is." "Maybe, but Clara, if someone's looking, then we'll deal with it." She went back to hanging wash, movements sharp and efficient. "I'm not running scared based on Ezra Stewart's tales." But that night, Jesse noticed she barred the door and closed the shutters, something she rarely did in the heat of late summer. They lay awake, starting at every sound, until finally Clara said, "Tell me what we're really afraid of." "Rangers, most likely. They've got long memories and longer reaches." Jesse stared at the ceiling. "Could be federal marshals if they connected me to that mail train job the gang pulled after I left. Bounty hunters are always possible. There's paper on me in Texas and Kansas for sure." "How much?" "Last I heard, 500 in Texas for Patterson. More in Kansas for the bank job." He turned to look at her. "Enough to make it worth someone's while." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I've got Samuel's rifle and the shotgun. You've got your Colts. We're not helpless." "Clara, you can't what defend my home, protect what's mine." She rolled to face him, eyes fierce even in the darkness. "You think I worked this land alone just to hand you over to the first man with a badge who comes calling? It's not worth your life." "That's not your choice to make." They held each other close, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps, every breath of wind like whispered threats. When dawn finally broke, they were both hollow-eyed and tense. The next few days passed in watchful waiting. Jessie stayed close to the house, rifle always within reach. Clara went about her chores with the shotgun propped nearby. They didn't speak of it, but both were preparing for something, though what, they couldn't say. It was Clara who spotted him first. She'd gone to town for supplies, taking the wagon despite Jessie's protests. When she returned, her face was grim. "There is a man," Stewart wasn't exaggerating. She unhitched the horses with quick, nervous movements. "He's staying at Morrison's boarding house. Big fellow, black beard, badge on his vest. He was at the general store asking about newcomers to the area." "What did you do?" "Bought my flour and acted like I couldn't hear him." She led the horses to the barn. "But Mrs. Morrison was there, and you know how she loves to talk. She mentioned seeing a man out this way, described you pretty well." Jessie felt the familiar cold settling in his spine, the feeling that had kept him alive through 3 years of running. "I should go. Tonight. Head north. Draw him away." "No." "Clara." "I said no." She spun to face him. "We knew this might happen. We talked about it, planned for it. You don't get to make noble sacrifices now. And if he comes here, if Stewart tells him exactly where to find me, then we face him together, like we promised." That night, they made love with desperate urgency, hands clutching, bodies trying to merge completely afterward. Jessie held her and whispered, "I need you to promise me something." "No, you don't even know what I'm going to ask. You're going to ask me to let you go if it comes to it, to not fight, to keep myself safe." Clara raised up on one elbow. "And the answer is no." "Clara." "Would you? If it was me they were hunting, would you stand aside and let them take me?" Jessie's silence was answer enough. The next morning brought Stewart again, this time with 2 other men from town. They stood at the gate, and Jessie watched from the window as Clara went out to meet them. "Morning, Clara," Stewart said, hat in his hands but eyes sharp as ever. "We've come about that stranger been staying here." "My husband's cousin. What about him?" "Now, Clara, there's no need for stories. We all know Sam didn't have any cousins." Stewart's voice turned coaxing. "We're just concerned for your reputation. A widow woman, alone with a drifter." "I believe Mrs. McKinley told you he's family?" Jessie stepped onto the porch, hands loose at his sides but ready. The peacemaker on his hip seemed to weigh 100 pounds. "Something else we can help you gentlemen with." The 3 men exchanged glances. One of them, Jenkins, who ran the feed store, cleared his throat. "There's a Texas Ranger in town, name of Colburn. He's looking for a man killed one of their own. Description sounds an awful lot like you, Mr. Lots of men fit a description. This one's got specifics. Scar on his left hand from a knife fight, bullet graze on his ribs, way he walks favoring his left side from an old break." Stewart's smile was triumphant. "Funny how you match every particular." Jessie felt Clara tense beside him but kept his own expression neutral. And we thought you should know he's planning to ride out this way tomorrow. Man like that, with blood on his hands, well, accidents happen when they try to resist arrest." Jenkins had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Just thought you deserved warning, on account of Clara." After they left, Clara sagged against the porch rail. "Tomorrow." "I could still run. Be gone before—" "Stop!" She straightened, jaws set. "We've got tonight to prepare. Tomorrow we face whatever comes." "You know what you're saying. A ranger's not some bounty hunter. He's got the law behind him, the whole state of Texas. Then we'd better be ready." She went inside, came back with Samuel's rifle. "Show me how to shoot better. I'm fair with a shotgun, but a rifle's different." They spent the afternoon practicing, Clara learning to lead a moving target, to account for wind and distance. She was a quick study, determined and steady. As the sun set, Jessie watched her sight down the barrel and thought his heart might break from loving her. "I've got something to tell you," he said as they walked back to the house. "About that money, I was thinking if something happens to me, you should know exactly where
She pressed her fingers to his lips. Nothing's going to happen. We're going to face this ranger and deal with whatever comes after. And then we're going to get on with our lives. Clara. No goodbyes, no final instructions, no noble sacrifices. She gripped his hand tight. We're going to win because we have more to lose. He's just doing a job. We're fighting for our lives.
That night, they prepared. Loaded weapons, barricaded windows, set up positions that would give them cover. It felt like preparing for war, which Jesse supposed it was. A small, personal war for the right to choose their own lives. When they finally went to bed, they held each other but didn't make love. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing whatever fate had in store. But tonight, they were together, two hearts beating as one, ready to face the dawn and all its dangers.
Whatever happens, Jesse whispered in the darkness, know that these weeks with you have been worth everything, worth 10 years of running, worth whatever comes tomorrow. Nothing's ending tomorrow, Clara whispered back. We're too stubborn for that.
But even as she said it, they both heard the lie in it. Tomorrow a man with a badge and the weight of Texas behind him would come calling. And one way or another, the life they'd built in this stolen summer would face its greatest test. Clara woke before dawn with a plan crystallizing in her mind. Jesse lay beside her, one arm flung protectively across her waist, even in sleep. She memorized his face in the gray pre-dawn light, the curve of his jaw, the way his lashes lay dark against weathered cheeks, the slight frown that never quite left him, even in dreams. Moving carefully, she slipped from beneath his arm and dressed in her darkest day dress. Jesse stirred but didn't wake exhaustion from their vigilant night weighing him down. Clara pressed a kiss to his forehead, then gathered what she needed, her egg money from the kitchen tin, Samuel's gold watch, the deed to the farm. The ride to town had never seemed longer. Every hoofbeat sounded like thunder in the still morning air. Clara kept expecting to see the ranger on the road, but she encountered no one except a few early-rising farmers who tipped their hats without really seeing her. Morrison's boarding house sat on Main Street, windows dark except for the kitchen where Mrs. Morrison would be starting breakfast. Clara tied her horse and walked around to the back entrance, heart hammering against her ribs. Lord have mercy, Mrs. Morrison clutched her chest when Clara knocked. Clara McKinley, what are you doing here at this ungodly hour? I need to speak with your boarder, the lawman.
Mrs. Morrison's eyes widened. That's not proper. A lady visiting. Please.
Clara pressed the gold watch into the woman's hands. It's important. Life and death important. Greed won over propriety. Mrs. Morrison pocketed the watch and pointed up the back stairs. Room 3, but I never saw you. Clara climbed the narrow stairs, each creak making her wince. At room 3, she knocked firmly before she could lose her nerve. Who is it? The voice was gravelly with sleep but alert a lawman's reflexes. Mrs. McKinley, I need to speak with you about Jesse Boone. A long pause, then footsteps and the door opening to reveal a man in his 50s, grizzled and scarred. Gun already in his hand despite being in his union suit. His eyes were cold as winter stone. Ma'am, he didn't lower the gun. Bit early for social calls. May I come in? What I have to say shouldn't be overheard. Ranger Colburn studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. The room was sparse, a bed, a chair, saddlebags in the corner. He pulled on trousers and a shirt while Clara stood by the window, gathering courage. You're here for Jesse, she said without preamble. I'm here for the man who murdered Frank Patterson. Colburn sat on the bed to pull on his boots. Your neighbors seem to think that man's been living at your farm.
He has.
Clara turned to face him.
He's there now, probably wondering where I've gone.
You here to turn him in? Skepticism colored his tone. Save yourself from aiding a fugitive. I'm here to tell you a story about Frank Patterson. I know all about Frank. Good ranger, good man.
No. Clara's voice was steady. He wasn't. And I think if you've been ranging as long as your face says you have, you know it. Colburn's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Careful, ma'am. Patterson shot Tom Boone in the back, an unarmed boy running scared. Clara gripped her reticule tight. Then he bragged about it in every saloon from El Paso to Fort Worth. Said the boy squealed like a pig when the bullet hit. You weren't there. Neither were you, but you've heard the stories, haven't you? About Patterson's other kills, about the Mexican family outside Laredo, the drummer who resisted arrest with nothing but a sample case. She stepped closer. How many complaints crossed your captain's desk that got buried because Patterson got results? Colburn was silent, jaw working. Jesse killed him. Yes, called him out in the street in Amarillo. Made him go for his gun fair and square. Half the town saw it. Clara pulled out the papers she'd brought. I went to the county seat yesterday. Found the court records. 20 witnesses said it was a fair fight. The only reason Jesse ran was because he knew the Rangers would never let their own die without payback. Fair fight or not. The law is the law. The law should be about justice. Clara set the deed on the small table. This is my farm, 160 acres of good land. It's yours if you'll report that Jesse Boone died resisting arrest, that you buried him somewhere on the prairie. Colburn's eyebrows rose. You're trying to bribe a Texas Ranger. I'm trying to save the man I love, and maybe give you a chance to let go of a hunt that shouldn't have started. She met his stare without flinching. Jesse's no angel. He's done things since robbed banks, ran with bad men, but that all started with Patterson, with a murdered boy and a system that protected his killer. Even if everything you say is true, I can't just— Why not? Clara interrupted. Who benefits from Jesse hanging? Not Tom, he's 3 years dead. Not Patterson, he got his justice in the street. Not even Texas, they've got real criminals to catch. Men who hurt innocent people. All you'd be doing is orphaning another family, creating another reason for someone to want revenge. Colburn stood, walked to the window. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky pink and gold. You know what you're asking? I'm asking you to be the lawman you probably started out wanting to be, the kind who cares more about right than regulations. And if I say no, if I ride out to your farm as planned— Clara straightened her spine. Then you'll find 2 people ready to die rather than be separated. And you'll have to kill us both, because I won't let you take him without a fight. You die for a killer. I die for the man who brings me breakfast in bed, who fixes my fences and holds me when nightmares come and looks at me like I'm the sunrise. Her voice broke slightly. I die for the man who could have taken what he wanted that first night but chose to sleep in the barn instead, who works from dawn to dusk trying to earn what I'd freely give. Colburn turned back to her, and she was surprised to see something almost like pain in his weathered face. I had a wife once. Comanche got her while I was out ranging. If I'd been there— He shook his head. Tell me about this farm. Hope flickered in Clara's chest. Good soil. Water year-round from Willow Creek. House needs work, but it's solid. Neighbors are decent folks, except for Stewart, but he's harmless. Town's close enough for supplies, far enough for privacy. And you just sign it over, give up everything. Jesse is everything. The farm's just land. Colburn picked up the deed, studying it. I've been ranging for 23 years, seen a lot of men killed, done my share of killing. Get so you forget why you started. Just follow the trail because it's there. You could stop, build something instead of tearing down. On a farm stolen with a lie. On a farm freely given for a greater truth. Clara stepped closer. Please, he's a good man who lost his way. Don't you think he deserves a chance to find it again? The ranger was quiet for so long Clara thought she'd failed. Then he folded the deed and put it in his pocket. Jesse Boone died yesterday evening. Shot trying to escape arrest near the Red River. I buried him there, no marker, as befits a murderer. His eyes bored into hers. That's what my report will say, what the records will show. You understand. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief.
Yes, there's a man at your farm who looks a bit like Boone, but that man's name is—" He thought for a moment. "McKinley. Jesse McKinley. Been there for months. Everyone says so. Quiet fellow. Good with horses. Devoted to his wife."
Yes,
Tears were running down Clara's face now.
yes, that's him.
"I'll be leaving town within the hour. Job's done." Colburn put on his gun belt, looking suddenly tired. "But ma'am, if I ever hear the name Jesse Boone again, if any more jobs get pulled or anyone else dies—" "You won't, I swear it." "Then we're done here." He opened the door, paused.
That story about Patterson, it true?
"Every word." "Thought so. Always knew he was a bastard. But he was our bastard. You understand?" Clara nodded. She understood loyalty, even misplaced. "Take care of your husband, Mrs. McKinley. Men who've been running that long sometimes forget how to stand still." "He's learning." She left the way she'd come. Mrs. Morrison nowhere to be seen. The ride home was a blur of relief and delayed terror. What if Colburn changed his mind? What if someone saw her leaving? What if? But when she crested the rise to the farm, everything looked normal. Smoke rising from the chimney, chickens pecking in the yard, and Jesse standing on the porch with the rifle, scanning the horizon. He lowered the gun when he saw her, and she read the storm of emotions crossing his face. Relief, anger, fear, love. "Where the hell have you been?" He caught her as she half fell from the saddle. "I woke up and you were gone and I thought, I fixed it." She was laughing and crying at once. "Jesse, I fixed it. You're dead. Jesse Boone is dead and buried by the Red River and nobody's looking for him anymore." "What are you talking about?" She told him everything, words tumbling over each other. Jesse's expression went from confused to stunned to something she couldn't quite read. "You gave away the farm." "I offered it, but he didn't take it in the end. Just let us be—" "Clara." He cupped her face in his hands. "You can't just— You could have been killed if he'd been a different kind of man. But he wasn't, and you're safe. We're safe." She gripped his wrists. "Jesse McKinley is safe." He kissed her then, hard and desperate, and she tasted salt and knew he was crying too. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." They went inside together, the morning sun warm on their backs. There would be more to discuss, plans to make for this new life. But for now, it was enough to stand in their kitchen, holding each other, free. Jesse Boone was dead. Jesse McKinley had a whole life ahead of him. And Clara had everything she'd never known she wanted. The letter from Kansas City arrived 3 weeks later, on a day when the September heat shimmered off the fields like water. Jesse had been helping Clara with the canning, his shirt sleeves rolled up and apron tied around his waist, a sight that never failed to make her smile. They were up to their elbows in tomatoes when young Billy Stewart rode up with the mail. "Letter for Mr. McKinley," the boy said, eyeing Jesse with barely concealed curiosity. The whole county had been talking about Clara's sudden marriage to her husband's cousin, but Jesse's steady presence and hard work had quieted the worst of the gossip. Jesse dried his hands slowly before taking the envelope. Clara watched his face change as he recognized the handwriting. "From your lawyer friend?" she asked after Billy rode off. "Thomas Hartwell, best defense attorney in Missouri." Jesse turned the letter over in his hands like it might bite. "Haven't heard from him in 4 years." "Are you going to open it?" He did, finally, standing there among the canning jars and tomato peels. Clara watched his eyes move across the page, saw the moment when something shifted in his expression. "What is it?" Jesse handed her the letter wordlessly. Clara read, "Asterisk, my dear Jesse. Asterisk, I hope this letter finds you well, though I suspect well is a relative term for a man in your position. I'm writing with news that may interest you. Asterisk, last month, I received a visitor, a Texas Ranger named Colburn. He informed me that Jesse Boone had died resisting arrest near the Red River. However, he also suggested I might know of a Jesse McKinley in Nebraska who bore a striking resemblance to the deceased. Asterisk. More importantly, he brought documents, sworn statements from witnesses to the confrontation between Jesse Boone and Frank Patterson. 23 citizens of Amarillo attesting it was a fair fight. He also had evidence of Patterson's history of excessive force, including 3 cases where unarmed men died, resisting arrest. Asterisk. I've taken the liberty of filing these documents with a judge here in Kansas City, Judge Harrison, who owes me several favors and has no love for Texas Rangers overstepping their authority. He's prepared to rule that any charges against Jesse Boone in the Patterson matter were unfounded, should anyone ever question it. Asterisk. As for the other matters, the alleged bank and train robberies without Jesse Boone alive to prosecute, those cases are effectively closed. The men he rode with are dead or scattered, and dead men tell no tales in court. Asterisk. In short, my friend, you are as free as any man can be who has lived as you have lived. The law has no further interest in Jesse McKinley of Nebraska. Asterisk, I hope you'll use this freedom wisely, and perhaps, someday, you'll introduce me to the woman who must be remarkable indeed to have tamed your restless spirit. Asterisk, your servant. Asterisk, Thomas Hartwell. Asterisk, Patterson. Ranger Colburn asked me to tell you a man ought to have a proper marriage certificate. Wouldn't want folks questioning the legitimacy of any future McKinley children. Asterisk. Clara's hands were trembling by the time she finished reading. Jesse, this means... It means we can stop looking over our shoulders. His voice was rough with emotion. It means we can build something real here. She flew into his arms, tomato juice and all, and he spun her around the kitchen like they were at a dance. When he set her down, both of them breathless and laughing, Clara saw tears on his cheeks. I never thought... He stopped, started again. I figured I'd be running forever, that even if they never caught me, I'd always be looking back. But now I can look forward. He framed her face with his hands, thumbs stroking her cheekbones. Marry me, Clara, properly this time, in church, with witnesses and papers and everything legal. We're already married in every way that counts. But I want it to count in every way. Want to stand up in front of God and everybody and claim you as my wife. His smile turned rueful. Besides, Colburn's right. Wouldn't want folks questioning our children. Children! Clara's hand went to her stomach automatically. Jesse, what if I can't? What if we can't? Then we'll be enough for each other. But Clara, I've got a feeling our luck is changing. She kissed him then, tasting tomatoes and possibilities. Yes, I'll marry you. Jesse McKinley, properly and publicly and proudly. They were married 2 weeks later. On a crisp October morning with the leaves just beginning to turn, Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit and smelling faintly of lavender. Jesse wore a new suit they'd bought in town, looking uncomfortable but handsome in the starched collar. The church was fuller than Clara had expected. Word had spread that the widow McKinley was marrying her late husband's cousin, and curiosity brought out neighbors who hadn't spoken to her in months. But there were friendly faces too, Mrs. Morrison, who'd forgiven Clara for the early morning visit once she heard the romantic story behind it, Doc Summers and his wife, even gruff old Theodore Becker from the Mercantile. Ezra Stewart sat in a back pew, face sour as week old milk, but Clara found she didn't care. Let him gossip. She was marrying the man she loved, and the law itself said they had every right. Reverend Phillips performed the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. When he asked if anyone had objections, Clara held her breath, half expecting someone to stand and denounce Jesse. But the church remained silent, except for Mrs. Morrison sniffles. She did love a wedding. I now pronounce you man and wife.
Reverend Philip said at last. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. McKinley." Jessie's kiss was thorough enough to raise eyebrows and set fans fluttering. Clara didn't care about that either. She was kissing her husband, legal and true, and the whole world could watch if it wanted. The reception was held at the farm. Tables groaning under the weight of food neighbors had brought. Clara moved through it all in a daze of happiness, accepting congratulations, watching Jessie charm even the skeptics with his quiet humor and obvious devotion. "Never seen you look so happy," Doc Summers said, patting her hand. "Does a so good to see." "I never knew I could be this happy," Clara admitted. "Well, you deserve it, both of you. Whatever brought him here, it's clear he's staying." As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to leave, Clara found herself on the porch with Jessie, watching the sun set over their fields. Their fields. The word had a permanence now that made her chest tight with joy. "No regrets?" Jessie asked, pulling her close. "Only that it took so long to find you." "I was thinking," he said slowly, "about that money, the hidden money." Clara tensed. They'd avoided the subject since the crisis passed. "What about it? What if we used it for something good, built a school for the county, or helped folks who are struggling?" He turned to look at her. "Turn blood money into something clean." "You do that, give it all away. I've got everything I need right here." He gestured at the house, the land, her. "Besides, might help me sleep better at night, balance the scales a little." Clara kissed him softly. "I think that's a wonderful idea, though maybe we keep a little back for Dr. Bills and such." "Dr. Bills?" Jessie's eyes widened. "Clara, are you—" "I don't know. Maybe it's early yet." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "But I've been feeling different lately. Tired. A little sick in the mornings." "Clara?" Her name was a prayer on his lips. "A baby." "Maybe. We'll know in time." She covered his hand with hers. "Would you mind a child with your wild blood?" "Mind." Jessie dropped to his knees right there on the porch, pressing his face to her stomach. "I'd be the proudest man in Nebraska. Hell, in the whole territory." Clara laughed, running her fingers through his hair. "Get up, you fool. What if someone sees—" "Let them see. Let the whole world see that Jesse McKinley loves his wife and hopes to God she's carrying his child." He stood, pulling her into his arms, and they swayed together in the gathering dusk. Inside the house, lamps were beginning to glow. Their neighbors had done the washing up, a wedding gift of sorts, leaving the kitchen clean and ready for morning. "I love you," Clara said against his chest. "Jesse Boone, Jesse McKinley. Whoever you are, I love all of you." "And I love you, Clara McKinley, have since that first night when you pointed a shotgun at me and offered me your barn." "I was terrified," she admitted. "So was I. Terrified you'd shoot. Terrified you wouldn't. Terrified of what I was feeling for a woman I'd just met." "And now I'm terrified of different things. Of not being a good enough husband. Maybe not being a good father. Of the past somehow reaching out to hurt you." He tilted her chin up. "But I'm not terrified of loving you. That's the one sure thing in my life." They went inside as full darkness fell, the house warm and welcoming. Their wedding night was different from that first desperate joining, slower, sweeter, touched with the knowledge that they had time now. All the time in the world. Later, as Clara drowsed in Jesse's arms, she thought about the strange paths that had brought them together. A storm, a lame horse, a desperate trade. Such small things to build a life on. But maybe that was how all lives were built, one small choice at a time, one day after another, until you looked up and found you'd created something worth keeping. Jesse Boone was dead and buried by the Red River. Jesse McKinley was very much alive, with a wife he adored, a farm to work, and just maybe a child on the way. It was more than enough. It was everything.
The harvest moon hung fat and golden over the McKinley farm, casting long shadows across the freshly cut wheat fields. Clara stood on the porch, one hand resting on her rounded belly, watching Jesse and the hired men load the last of the grain onto wagons. It was their best harvest yet, the stalks heavy with kernels that would fetch good prices at market. "You shouldn't be on your feet so much," Doc Summers said, stepping out from the house where he just finished his monthly examination. "That baby's sitting low. Won't be long now." Clara smiled, feeling the child shift within her. "I can't help it. Too much to do, too much to see. Let Jesse and the men handle it. That's what you're paying them for." She watched her husband swing a grain sack like it weighed nothing, his movements sure and strong. The year since their wedding had been good to him. The hunted look had faded from his eyes, replaced by something settled and content. He caught her watching and waved, that boyish grin still making her heart skip. "He's changed," Doc observed, following her gaze. "When he first came here, he had the look of a man running from shadows. Now he looks like a man who's found home." "We both have." The screen door creaked and misses. Morrison emerged, wiping flour from her hands. She'd come to help with the harvest cooking, but spent more time fussing over Clara than feeding the workers. "I've got supper started," she announced. "Beef stew and fresh bread. Apple pie for after. That ought to fill those men up proper." "Thank you, Martha. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Well, you won't have to find out. Someone's got to make sure you don't work yourself into an early labor." She patted Clara's arm. "Besides, I'm hoping when my time comes to need help, you'll remember." As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the workers began drifting toward the house, drawn by the smell of food. Jesse was the last to come, stopping at the pump to wash the grain dust from his face and hands. "Good harvest," he said, dropping a kiss on Clara's cheek. "Best this farm's ever seen, I'd wager." Samuel would never have believed it possible, Clara said softly. It no longer hurt to speak his name, just brought a gentle sadness for a life cut short. Well, Samuel never had 3 strong backs to help, or money to buy good seed. Jesse's hand found hers. "We did right, using some of that buried money for the farm, making something clean from something that wasn't." They'd retrieved the stolen money shortly after their wedding, Jesse leading her to the abandoned mine on a cold November morning. $3,000 in mixed bills, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath fallen timbers. They'd used a third for the farm new equipment, good breeding stock, hired help for the harvest. Another third had gone to building a school for the county, anonymously donated through Doc Summers. The rest sat in the bank in town, security against hard times. "The school dedication is next week," Clara reminded him. "They want us there for the ribbon cutting." "Still think it's foolish, naming it after Tom," Jesse said, but his voice was warm. The Thomas Boone School would serve farm children for miles around, giving them the education Tom himself had never finished. "It's perfect, a way to honor him that doesn't involve violence or revenge." Jesse pulled her close, mindful of her belly between them. "How'd I get so lucky, finding a woman wise enough to save me from myself?" "Luck had nothing to do with it. You rode through that storm straight to where you belonged." The workers were gathering around the long tables they'd set up in the yard, their voices carrying on the evening air, stories of other harvests, jokes about pretty girls in town, plans for spending their wages, normal talk from normal men living normal lives. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real," Jesse murmured. "Keep thinking I'll wake up under some bridge, horse gone lame, nothing in my pockets but regret. It's real." Clara took his hand and placed it on her belly, where their child kicked strongly. "We're real. This life we've built is real." They joined the others for supper, Jesse at the head of the table like he'd been born to it. He carved the meat and passed plates, listened to the men's stories, laughed at their jokes. Watching him, Clara marveled at the transformation. The dangerous drifter who'd appeared in her storm had become a respected farmer, a good neighbor, a man others looked to for fair dealing and honest work. "McKinley," one of the hands said. "My brother's looking for work come spring. Good with horses, steady hand. Think you might have a place for him." Jesse glanced at Clara, who nodded. "Send him around. We'll be needing extra help once the baby comes." "Speaking of which, Mrs. Morrison interjected, have you given thought to names?" Clara and Jesse exchanged smiles. They'd had this discussion many times in the privacy of their bedroom. "Thomas for a boy," Jesse said firmly, "after my brother." "And Sarah for a girl," Clara added, "after Jesse's first wife." If anyone thought it strange to name a child after a spouse's first love, they kept it to themselves. This was the frontier everyone had lost someone. Everyone understood that love wasn't diminished by honoring the past. As the evening wore on and the workers began departing, full of food and pay, Ezra Stewart appeared at the gate. Relations had been strained since the incident with Ranger Colburn, but he'd been notably absent from the harvest crew. "Stewart," Jesse acknowledged, standing slowly. "Something we can help you with?" Stewart shifted uncomfortably. "Wanted to. That is, I heard you're donating books to the new school." "Clara's doing that," Jesse said carefully. "Got a whole crate ready to go." "Well, my young ones will be attending that school. Wanted to thank you, both of you." The words seemed to pain him. "And to say, maybe I judged too hasty before. Man does good by his wife, works his land honest, helps his neighbors. Well, that's all that should matter." He thrust out his hand. Jesse looked at it for a long moment, then shook it firmly. "Appreciate that, Stewart. Past is past." After Stewart left, looking relieved, Clara slipped her arm through Jesse's. "That must have cost him dearly, coming here." "Pride's expensive when you're wrong," Jesse said. "I should know." They were cleaning up the last of the dishes when Clara felt the first pain sharp and low, taking her breath away. She gripped the edge of the table, waiting for it to pass. "Clara," Jesse was at her side instantly. "What is it?" I think it's time." The next hours blurred together, Jesse riding hard for Doc Summers, Mrs. Morrison taking charge with the efficiency of a woman who'd birthed 6 children, Clara gripping Jesse's hand through waves of pain that threatened to tear her apart. "You're doing fine," Doc Summers assured her. "Baby's positioned right, heartbeat strong, just needs some time." Time. Clara had no sense of it anymore, caught between pain and determination. Jesse never left her side, letting her squeeze his fingers white, murmuring encouragement when she wanted to give up. "Remember that first night?" he said during a brief respite. "You were so brave, facing down a stranger with just a shotgun and pure grit. This is nothing compared to that." "This is considerably worse," Clara panted, but managed to smile. Dawn was breaking when their son finally arrived, screaming his displeasure at the bright new world. Doc Summers cleaned him up and placed him in Clara's arms, red-faced, perfect, with a shock of dark hair like his father's. "Thomas Jesse McKinley," Clara whispered, touching the baby's tiny fingers. "Welcome to the world, little one." Jesse was crying openly, not caring who saw. "He's perfect! Look at him! Clara! We made this! We made a whole person!" "Would you like to hold him?" Clara offered. Jesse took his son with infinite care, as if the baby might break from rough handling. Little Thomas immediately stopped crying, staring up at his father with unfocused eyes. "Hello, son," Jesse whispered. "I'm your papa. I'm going to teach you everything how to ride, how to work the land, how to be a good man. Better than I was for a long time. But most important, I'm going to teach you how to love fierce and true, like your mama taught me." Clara reached up to touch Jesse's face, feeling the wetness there. "You'll teach him to be brave, too, to face his mistakes and make them right." "We both will." Jesse settled on the bed beside her, their son cradled between them. We'll teach him that people can change, that love can redeem even the worst sins, that sometimes you have to ride through the storm to find where you belong. Outside, the sun climbed higher over their fields, painting everything gold. The harvest was in, the baby was here, and life stretched before them full of promise. It hadn't been an easy road from that first stormy night to this golden morning, but every step had been worth it.
I love you,
Clara said, drowsy now that the ordeal was over.
both of you, my men.
And we love you, Jessie replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Forever and then some. As Clara drifted off to sleep, she heard Jessie talking softly to their son, telling him about his Uncle Tom, about the school that would bear his name, about second chances and the courage to take them. It was a good story, she thought hazily, a story worth telling, years from now. Thomas Jesse McKinley would grow up hearing that story, how his parents found each other in a storm, how love conquered fear and past conquered present. He'd ride his father's horse and help his mother in her garden and never doubt for a moment that he was wanted, cherished, loved beyond measure. But for now, he simply slept in his father's arms while his mother dreamed beside them. 3 hearts beating in the quiet rhythm of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a future bright with possibility. The drifter, who'd once traded his horse for a night's shelter, had found something worth far more than any trade: a home, a family, a place to finally stand still. And Clara, who'd thought her life ended with Samuel's death, had discovered it was only beginning. Sometimes the best stories were the ones that grew from the humblest seeds: a storm, a lame horse, 2 lonely people brave enough to take a chance on each other. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and Jessie's journey. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, redemption, and second chances in the American frontier.